You're a careful rider. You've been riding for years. But when you're riding in traffic following all the rules, you've been rear-ended. And the police report says it's the other driver's fault. You've even got a witness. Pretty open and shut, right? We've gotten this call many times. The open and shut case changes when the insurance company claims, oh, actually you stopped too fast, or you weren't visible enough. And suddenly your slam dunk case doesn't seem so open and shut after all. I'm Matt Albrecht, a personal injury attorney in Washington, and I've seen this happen to riders over and over, even when they're careful and even when fault seems obvious. This video is going to explain why motorcycle crash cases are never quite as simple as they seem, and there's 6 factors that could quietly sabotage your claim if you're not ready. Because when it's your recovery and your reputation on the line, open and shut doesn't really exist. So let's dive straight into something I deal with all the time. Motorcycle crashes right here in Washington State. People come to our office and they say, I've got an open and shut case. The other driver was clearly at fault. Maybe the other driver admitted it was his fault to the police. Maybe the police ticketed him. And I can understand your confidence if you're sitting there with a police report and the witness saw everything and the person who caused the crash admitted it. But guess what? When they hire an attorney and they go to court and they meet with their insurance company, all of a sudden that same person, and I promise you this happens, I've seen it happen, decided that it wasn't their fault after all. They got convinced that there was nothing they could do. It was really your fault. That's why there's no such thing as an open and shut motorcycle crash case in Washington. They're never as simple as they seem. Today, I'll walk you through exactly why that is. And I'm going to share the real-world obstacles, the complicated Washington laws, and the kind of surprises that could trip up even the most obvious motorcycle crash claims. If you ride, or you know someone who does, then you're going to need to know what makes a motorcycle crash case so different from a normal case. Number 1. There is a reality of bias against motorcyclists. I love motorcycles and I've ridden them since I was a kid. I've raced them and I've ridden every kind there is. But let's be honest, most people think motorcyclists are just a little bit off. They're taking a lot more risk than the rest of us. They're doing something that's not quite as safe. And so there is a risk that the average juror will look at you on a motorcycle and they'll say, you know, you shouldn't have been that careless. And you say, I wasn't careless. And they go, I meant you getting on the motorcycle in the first place. And that's a deep-seated bias against motorcycle riders, even here in Washington State. It affects police, insurance adjusters, juries, sometimes even the doctors who treat you might have an attitude against the motorcycle rider. When most people see a motorcycle crash, what I hear usually is they must have been speeding, weaving, or taking risks. And we all know there are motorcycle riders who do that. Of course, we also know that's not the majority. But it's so common that when you're the one who gets injured, you might find yourself being the only one in the room who believes you weren't at fault. Let me give you a real-world example. A motorcycle rider is out in Spokane Valley and he's driving safely. He's driving the speed limit. In fact, he's teaching his wife how to ride, so she's right behind him. He doesn't do anything wrong. He follows all the rules. But a vehicle that's coming the other way and speeding runs right through a stop sign and crashes into him. His wife watches this happen. And still, the police don't believe him. And still, the insurance company doesn't believe him. The whole time through the case, we had to defend against them claiming he must have been speeding. He must have been going too fast. He must have been careless. And we couldn't find video in that case. So it ended up being his wife's word against the other driver's word. That made the case a lot more difficult. We were finally able to get the case treated seriously and taken care of fairly. But this is an example of the kind of bias you can expect to face. If that had been 2 cars in this crash, there wouldn't have even been a doubt. I know who the ticket would have been issued to, and I know that the insurance company would have taken care of it promptly because of how serious it was. Because it was a motorcycle, it was really kind of ridiculous how long it was to get this resolved for them, despite everything we could do. So you need to be ready for more pushback than if you were driving a car. Number 2, Washington's comparative fault law complicates the case. Let's talk about how fault works in Washington. We have what's called pure comparative fault. This means that if you're found even a little bit at fault for your crash, your compensation goes down by that much. Let's say you have $100,000 in damages, but a jury says you were 30% at fault because they find that maybe you didn't use your turn signal, or maybe you switched lanes a little faster than they think was appropriate before you got rear-ended. So in that situation, you would then only get $70,000 of your claim. Here's why it matters. In most motorcycle cases, insurance companies will almost always try to pin some blame on the rider. It doesn't take much. Headlight wasn't on. You didn't brake as early as you should have. It was hard to see your taillights. They were covered by mud. In one case I worked on near Spokane, a rider was hit by a driver who turned left in front of him. A classic scenario. You would think there's no doubt about this case. But the insurance company argued the sun was low, the rider was wearing dark clothes, and he was going too fast. That made him less visible. Suddenly, this open and shut case wasn't so open and shut anymore. Comparative fault gives the insurance company an opening to fight to reduce your claim, even when the facts look clear. They'll dig deep for anything they can use to share the blame. It's their job, and they're good at their job. Number 3, the evidence in motorcycle crashes will disappear fast. Motorcycle crashes are messy. The rider usually ends up injured or worse, and the bikes are very often destroyed. Unlike car accidents, there aren't crumple zones or airbags to keep things in place. There's no electronic data recorder in most motorcycles. Debris scatters, and witnesses only remember a flash of what happened. And remember that bias I talked to you about? Well, that bias affects all of the witnesses as well. If that witness has been cut off by motorcycles, if they think that motorcycles drive too fast, then when they see you and they relay what they saw, they are likely to relay a biased version that says you were flying down the road, that you zipped from lane to lane, where if it was any other car, it would just be that you were driving down the road and you changed lanes. Here's something that's happened more than once. A client comes in a week after the accident, but by that time we try going to the scene and the skid marks are gone. The broken plastic was swept up. We check with the nearby convenience shop. They used to have video. There is a camera, but it's been erased. That evidence disappears so quickly and it will really hurt your case. Now, in Washington state, police reports are important, but a lot of times they don't capture the whole story. Remember, that bias affects police officers as well. The police officer might write down a pieced together story based on very little physical evidence and a few shocked, possibly biased witnesses. So, you might end up with a police report that doesn't seem very fair to you. If you're able, take photos, get contact information for the witnesses, write down all the details you can remember after the accident. Don't rely on other people to have your back or protect you. The police are not necessarily there to protect your rights in this police report. One client we had in downtown Spokane did this perfectly. They took pictures of everything, including close-ups of the road surface, the bike, how it was positioned, even the tire marks. Now, those photos ended up being the key to winning his case. Turned out, even though the driver agreed it was his fault and apologized on the scene, as often happens, he changed his mind later on when there was a lawsuit and changed his story as quick as he changed his mind. It could have been a he said, she said situation. Instead, those photos were really important. Number 4, motorcycle injuries are unique, and so are the medical challenges that come with it. Let's be real, when you're in a motorcycle crash, the injuries are much, much more severe. We see everything from road rash to broken bones to traumatic brain injuries, life-altering spinal injuries. These are very rarely just scratches and bruises kinds of cases. But here's what makes it tricky. Injuries from a motorcycle crash can sometimes take days or weeks to fully show up. You might walk away from a crash thinking you dodged a bullet, and then find out a week later you have a serious neck or back injury. Some people ignore their pain. Most motorcyclists are fairly tough people. They're used to physical discomfort, and they'll think, well, this will go away after a few days. But this can actually make your claim harder, and it can make your recovery harder. In Washington, insurance companies will jump on any delay in treatment. They'll argue if you were really hurt, you would have went to the ER right away. Now, that's just not true for a lot of riders. Maybe you thought it was just a little soreness, and maybe the adrenaline masked the pain. Maybe you just didn't really want to acknowledge how badly you were hurt because you were hopeful. A lot of us will use hope as a plan because we hope it'll feel better. But in any case, whatever the gap in treatment is for, the bottom line is what it does to your case is gives the defense and an insurance company a reason to offer you less money. I had one case that ended up in a wrongful death. On the scene of the crash, the motorcyclist got up, walked around, talked to people, picked up his own motorcycle, well, tried to. Turned out he couldn't pick up his motorcycle. And initially didn't think he needed medical care. Said he didn't think he needed the ambulance. Thank goodness the ambulance didn't listen and they hung around because by the time he got to the hospital, he was unconscious. He ended up in a coma and in and out of a coma for several weeks before passing away. Because he was able to get to the hospital, at least his family had a chance to say goodbye to him. But as an example of how you don't necessarily know if you're hurt, Imagine that you could be capable of walking around talking to people and picking up a motorcycle and not realizing that you might have suffered an actually fatal injury. So avoid that. You want to make sure that you let the medical professionals take care of you. So always get checked out after a crash. Get it in writing from the emergency room. Go see the doctor. If your symptoms change, go back to the doctor. Also, if your symptoms don't change, go back to the doctor because they're supposed to improve, right? You should be healing. If you're not healing, you need to go back to the doctor and let them know that. Your medical records will be the backbone of your case. Number 5. Insurance companies will use every trick in the book. You have to understand that insurance companies are in the business of making profits. They are not in the business of paying out claims more quickly or fairly than they are forced to pay them out, especially with motorcycle crashes. They know how expensive the injuries can be, and they'll do whatever they have to minimize your payout. That's what they do in Washington, and I see it every day. Oftentimes, you'll receive a quick lowball offer, and you'll be pressured to sign before you really understand how seriously you were injured. They'll comb through your social media for any photos or posts that make you look healthy or for old photos that make you look reckless. They'll dig through your past, look for any previous injuries or accidents they can blame your pain on. If you ever hurt yourself, they'll say that's the real reason that you're in the hospital today. They'll hire their own medical experts to try to say your injuries aren't really so bad as your doctor says. For example, I had a client in Pierce County who posted a photo of himself dancing at his daughter's wedding a few weeks after his accident. The insurance company used this smiling, dancing photo to say he really wasn't hurt, ignoring the fact that this was a special event and he took extra medication. He went to his doctor and asked for prescription medicines so that he would be able to attend in the first place. And there was no way that he was going to make that wedding be focused on his pain. So he hid it from everybody. And then he went home and he stayed by himself for day after day to recover from what he went through for that. But there is a smiling photo and it looks like he has no pain. So be careful what you put on social media. Remember, they're looking after the crash for any reason to not pay you. You need someone who knows all the tricks and can spot these patterns. That's why it's not a good idea to talk to insurance companies without first getting legal advice. Even simple conversations or innocent posts can come back to haunt you. It's a good idea after a crash to just mark everything private and probably not to be posting any more than needed. As I've said before, it's also a good idea for everyone to just post less on social media. Number 6. Every case has hidden details that could change everything. Sometimes one piece of evidence or one piece of paper could seem small, but it changes the whole case. Maybe the other driver has minimal insurance. Oftentimes in a motorcycle crash, you don't have underinsured motorist coverage. A lot of people don't realize this, but UIM coverage is required to be offered by insurers in Washington state, but not for a motorcycle. So you'll have to ask and make sure that you do have UIM insurance on your motorcycle. And you might have to follow through on special rules if you need to follow up on claims that involve road maintenance or road construction, or you won't be able to hold those folks responsible. I can give you a real example. I helped a client with something that was caused by a construction defect in the road, and it was equivalent to a pothole or a ledge on the asphalt. And it was only an inch to a half an inch higher and more steep than it should have been. But it turns out that's exactly the amount it needed to be to cause the crash. And that's what happened in that case. I had another example where a pothole was being covered, but the cover slid off and the motorcycle crashed. Well, if we didn't have the picture at that moment of exactly how that was supposed to be and where it had slid, then it might be impossible to have ever shown that. Those little tiny details would change what seems like a simple accident into things that could be much more complicated. The bottom line, until all the facts and details are uncovered, there's no case that is truly open and shut. I've had cases for motorcycle crash claims with admissions on the scene and with signed admissions to the police the day after, and with a 911 call admitting in the 911 call, it was my fault. Oh my God, I just hit a guy. And those stories changed. As soon as the lawsuit opened, those stories changed. And that could be true for every motorcycle crash claim in Washington. So here's what we've covered. No motorcycle accident case in Washington is really open and shut. Bias, comparative fault, fast disappearing evidence, the unique type of injuries caused by motorcycle crashes. insurance company tactics, and hidden case details can all combine to make even the most simple accident into a real fight. That's why you have to be careful, smart, and proactive if you've been in a motorcycle crash. I don't mean to scare you. I just want to make sure that you and your loved ones are protected. So if you found this video to be helpful, you're going to want to watch our next one, how to get the most for your property damage claim after a car crash. I'm going to go over inside tips that most people, even a lot of attorneys, will miss. Don't risk leaving money on the table or making a mistake that could cost you a lot. Click through to the next video and give yourself the best chance at a fair settlement and peace of mind if you're dealing with a property loss. See you over there.